Welcome back. This is another episode of the Dissecting Medicine podcast. My name is Jesse. I am an applicant to medical school. In this podcast, I speak to a range of different clinicians, researchers, and also medical students as well to try and research a little bit more about what the realities of studying and practicing medicine really are as I prepare for hopefully next year entering into one of those programs. Hopefully this will be a helpful set of discussions that can help you plan your own future as well. Today what we're doing is talking to the moderator team of the GAMSAT Subreddit and Discord groups. If you're not already on those, the links are already below. I would encourage you to jump onto them. We basically had a really long chat on Friday last week. It was really helpful. It was full of insights. Pretty much the entire time is full of advice. So hopefully you'll be able to draw a lot out of the next 2 hours. It's quite a long episode. Feel free to chop it up into bits or have it playing in the background if you're listening to it as well. But otherwise, it was really good to actually sit down and meet the moderators for the first time properly. We've been chatting back and forth a little bit. They're really wonderful people. And for those of you that are following along on either of those forums, you're in safe hands. They know what they're talking about. They're very compassionate people. And I'm sure you'll be able to make that judgment for yourself just from listening to the conversation. Anyway, I'll leave that there, and I hope you enjoy the episode. And I'll just get going. I try to have a 2-camera setup now, but usually it makes editing an absolute nightmare. Cool. All right. So welcome everybody. Welcome to the people that are watching as well. We have today the moderator team from the GAMSAT subreddit and now also the Discord, which I'm really interested in learning a lot more about. Liv, you're already mentioning before that my name's come up on there a few times. So it'll be cool to hear a little bit more, get a little bit more insight from you guys about what's been happening, what kind of roles you have in that. And then more importantly, we're going to spend a bit of time talking about GAMSAT preparation. A lot of people are in the interview preparation phase right now, including myself. And then also your experiences at medical school, given that you're all first years, right? Everyone's MD1. Yeah, cool. Mm-hmm. So I'll go round, and I don't know how to do this without making it feel like it's back at like primary school with the let's go around the room, and I won't make you say something interesting about yourself unless you really want to, but I remember how cringy that always was. But I might start with you, Liv, to introduce yourself, just explain what uni you're at, and just a little bit about like how you kind of came to pursuing medicine.
So I'm an MD1 at the University of Melbourne. And probably I'm the only mod here that doesn't come from like a traditional biomed background. So like for the first my entire bachelor's, I was going to be a software engineer. That was like my dream. And then I started working in I did an internship in software engineering, realized it was really bad, had a career crisis during 2020 and settled on medicine, took the GAMSAT, and here I am. So wow. It was a pretty condensed and intense year, but I think the pandemic, sort of other things in my life kind of helped me focus on what I wanted to be doing, and it was medicine, definitely not software engineering.
Right, there you go. That's quite a leap to go from software engineering to medicine. I don't know if there's a more disparate pair of courses.
No, it was very different. I did a neuroscience major as well, and so I was thinking, I was like, do I do a computational neuroscience PhD? Like, it was a wild year. But it's actually really helpful in medicine, I find, because the research space is kind of moving towards more computer science based things anyway. So it's a good skill set to have moving through medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. And Luke, I don't want to catch you mid-sip there, but I'll get you to introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Luke. I'm a first year at UQ up in Brisbane. My background is I've done a few different things. I've kind of had a bit of a wiggly journey. I started doing a Bachelor of Science down in Melbourne, and then I finished that and I did honours in 2020 in sort of a wet lab sort of research, anatomy, developmental biology. And then I finished a second bachelor last year in health science with sort of a public health preventive medicine focus. And that sort of was partly to do with medicine, in that I initially began doing that degree as a way to sort of improve my GPA, because in 2020, obviously with COVID and everything like that, a lot of the universities were like, no, we're not going to count 2020. And I was halfway through my honours project and was like, well, I was kind of relying on this. So I kind of ended up doing the Bachelor of Health Science as sort of initially as with that sort of in mind. But in doing that degree, it's actually completely changed my perspective around medicine, and has actually kind of I'm very glad I ended up doing it. And even though in like a weird roundabout way, it ended up not actually mattering because UQ ended up using my honors degree anyway. So I didn't have to do it. No, I still like, I didn't actually benefit from it application wise, but in terms of like my growth and my attitude towards medicine, that's been a huge, I really felt I benefited from that. Yeah, so bit of a different journey, but yeah, I feel quite passionate about sort of not having to follow one particular path. Like you don't need to sort of decide right away and kind of know and, do biomeds at the GAMSAT and go straight into medicine. Like I think that every journey you take towards that, I think is really important. And I'm really glad that I sort of took the way that I did. Yeah.
It's turned out as well that you've ended up with quite the knowledge of the actual process and the different entry requirements for different unis. Because I think very early on in my channel, I think you might have commented on a video and gave this really long, really response. I was like, this is brilliant. I was like, how does this person know the ins and outs of everything? And then as I was reading through, you're explaining like, I did this degree, then I switched, then I did this. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. He's like lived every part of
Learn through experience.
Yep, absolutely. Cool. And Renee as well.
So yeah, I am part of Luke's cohort, MD1 at UQ. I started out year 12, was really keen on medicine. I didn't get the OP1 that I needed, so decided to do biomed, which I think is a common thing for a lot of people interested in med at that age. Did biomed, GPA was okay, but I think during that process, I got a little bit burnt out. And so I decided to go on and do a master's after that instead of applying for med or sitting the GAMSAT. Did a master's of biotech. I kind of liked it. Wasn't really what I was expecting, but ended up starting a job after that in biotech in ethics. Hated that so much. Kind of had the same crisis that Liv had at a similar time. I think it was, like must have been mid 2020 because I sat the September 2020 GAMSAT. So yeah, I was basically in that job, like COVID, working from home, hating it, kind of studying for the GAMSAT when I should have been working. Sat the GAMSAT in September and then applied the following year for entry for 2022. Was actually rejected at first. I got an EOD after interview, and then got a second round offer. So I guess I have a unique experience in that way that not many people get second round offers. So I was really, really lucky. So yeah, I guess I interviewed, sat the GAMSAT once, interviewed once, got rejected once, and got in eventually. So I had the whole experience, which was nice. But yeah, here now.
Cool. And it kind of shows, doesn't it, that like we've got three of you here today, and like no one here has done the clean, like I did a Bachelor of Biomedicine and went straight into an MD. Like it kind of proves that the times are changing, because I think back to like when I was in my undergrad, and maybe I had it wrong because like I was kind of on the outside looking in as well, but it really, I think there was a much higher proportion of people just kind of going through the straight path. And it's really good to see that graduate entry medicine is opening itself up to more and more candidates from different backgrounds and different disciplines. And it's obviously becoming more accessible. We know there's still like issues with access and equality of access and that kind of thing as well. But just seeing, like hearing each of your three stories and knowing that no one here started off just like, well, I mean, Renee, so you said that like you were interested in medicine immediately, but it still wasn't like the straight path. And I think that's good for people watching and knowing, like if their path is not looking as straight as what they were first planning it, that it doesn't mean end of the road kind of thing.
And I think that's a good point. And I think that if you asked any of us, we wouldn't change our path at all. Like if I could go back, I wouldn't wish that it had been more straight and narrow. Like I learned so much on the way. So I think that that's an important point to people who are now endeavoring to get in, that we all enjoyed our experience and wouldn't change it.
Yeah, and I see that kind of commentary a lot in this space, where a lot of people feel really pressured to have everything sorted out by 25 or by 30, like by an age. And they're worried, like, what if I'm older than the rest of the students? What if I'm behind the rest of my friends? And like each of you have taken a long-winded path in some sorts to medicine, and myself included. Like hopefully I will be in a medical degree next year, but like I'm just a fourth one, like in the big pool of people that are not following a very traditional pathway towards it. And you're right. Like I would speak the same thing in that I wouldn't regret a single bit of the 8-9 years that I've had out of university, because every bit of it has added value. And it wasn't as if it was like there was never a point where I felt like I'm just doing this as a backup as well.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've each found that as well, like that even if medicine was kind of in the vicinity, it's never been just like, oh, I'll just do this to bridge some time. Like you really are dedicated to that thing. And then obviously passions change over time and then opportunities arise and you have to take them. So yeah, it's really, really cool to hear.
No, I'm really glad I worked in another space because I think it has made me more sure of medicine. I think sometimes for some people, if you just follow that path and you never really question it and you never try anything else, I think it can sometimes make it harder when the course gets difficult because you don't know what else is out there and if you prefer to be doing something else.
Right.
So we can definitely learn from different careers.
Yeah, well, that kind of brings up an extra question that I didn't really have planned for you, but like, what are your thoughts on the undergraduate pathway now being all in an MD program with a bit more experience behind you before you start that process? I might get you to each kind of weigh in on what your thoughts are on the undergraduate pathway for people that are year 12 leavers moving straight into, say, a 5-year or 6-year course.
I can only speak for myself in that at 17, like I finished high school at 17, I was not mature enough to handle the course. And I'm sure there are people who are, right? But I think medicine's a really difficult course. And I think a level of maturity and life experience that another degree can give you is actually very beneficial. And I know from some of the doctors I've spoken to, some of the undergraduate students can be a little bit more unsure and stuff on the wards for the first time, just because they lack some of that life experience. And I'm sure by the end of the degree, they're obviously everyone's in exactly the same place and are equally as capable. But I personally prefer the postgraduate path, and I like the shift that Australia is having to sort of having more of those postgrad programs and having less undergrad only sort of stuff. That's just my opinion, but other people may disagree. Yeah.
Renee, you were going to weigh in there.
So I guess I don't really know a lot about the undergraduate pathway in like the MBBS, like the actual undergrad medicine course, but I do know that we are in a cohort with a lot of students who came through the provisional pathway at UQ, which meant they got their 99 ATAR or OP1 when I went through school, and just had to finish a degree, have a 5 GPA and move into medicine. And I definitely think that there's a difference in the adjustment to the medical course, being that people who came through and had to sit the GAMSAT and have a high GPA to get in are used to sacrificing a lot and really working hard to have the scores required to get into medicine. Whereas provisional, it went from year 12 to just need to get a 5 in my course and then start medicine and think that they can treat the the MD the same way they treated their undergrad. And so there's definitely been a little bit more of a struggle in that adjustment. And that's not just my observation, that's things that's been told to me by friends that I have who are provisional students. So I think that the GAMSAT pathway, the postgrad pathway, does prepare you quite well for starting an MD. I've noticed that.
It's interesting. And then Luke as well.
Yeah, I think I feel very similarly to Liv and Renee and sort of what they've talked about in regards to like the preparedness entering the MD, but also sort of maturity and sort of that sort of life experience. I personally, I was always interested in medicine. It was that was my goal long term, and it didn't really pan out with high school and graduate. So in my when I sort of first started my degree, there was a lot of outside factors. Like that's something that's really important to recognize as well. It's that actually applying for medicine has, like there are a lot of factors that may influence that as well. And I think that thinking about the undergrad pathway, like an argument that I've seen a lot for it is that, people are passionate about it. If they want to do medicine when they're in high school, that, they should be allowed to do that because, that is like, they know what they want. And I feel like in some ways, I don't really like that attitude because I think there are plenty of people who do want to do medicine, who would be capable of doing medicine, who don't have the privilege and the support in order to do well in high school. Because I think that although there's obviously discrepancies between, high school and uni, and you still privilege is still an important factor. I feel like support and in high school, I think that your capacity to do well is a lot more dictated by that, and that university can be a little bit more of an even playing field, not necessarily completely, but more so in many ways. So I think that I personally would like to see Australia move towards just having postgraduate. Provisional, I think that's a fair option as well, but I personally think that I prefer the way the postgraduate pathway is sort of sorry. I prefer the way the postgraduate pathway is conducted, and I feel like the actual application towards that, as others have said, is beneficial in sort of, you know, shaping that life experience and giving people that life experience. And as well, like I've got my partner who she's in her final year of medicine, and she actually did the standard biomed pathway, and she was rejected from undergrad medicine and applied, but you know, she'd gotten through the interview, was rejected post interview. And she has told me many times that she is so glad that she was rejected, because even though she only ended up doing an extra 2 years of uni, because the undergrad was 5 years, and she ended up doing 7 with her biomed undergrad and then the 4 years MD. Her entire life experience, the way that she, you know, views herself, university and her first couple of years of university, it was such a foundational time for her in terms of developing her own identity and, you know, really exploring who she was outside of studying, and, you know, being very diligent and focused towards a goal. And so she really doesn't regret it, and she thinks that that time was really important. So I think that, you know, even the people who are, you know, potentially would do really well in undergrad, I think that having that little bit of time to sort of be yourself and adjust to, you know, higher education, university, because it's very different to high school. I think that is worthwhile, in my opinion. But yeah. I'm not saying that we should ban all undergrads, but I prefer that the way the postgrad process works personally, and from speaking to my partner, she feels very similarly as well.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting you say that too, because like I think I've spoken really publicly on my channel about my experience getting knocked back at the end of my undergrad in 2013, and it wasn't even like, I genuinely did not feel bad about it. It was 100% relief, and I was so surprised by the way that I responded to it, that I went through that whole process and there was so much anxiety, and then as soon as I didn't get in after the interview phase, I was just like, I'm so glad I don't have to do uni for another 4 years. And it just kind of hit me like, I'm not ready for this, and I don't know if this is what I want to do. And then that's why I spent like 8 years just not even thinking about it. It only came to me when, it was funny, the actual kind of moment was that someone who I was helping actually prepare for the GAMSAT, just kind of informally, and I was just talking about work, and they just said, you should be a doctor. And then it just kind of flipped the switch, and I just sat on it and thought about it for a while. And I realized that I'd spent the whole 8 years literally not thinking about it. And it was a genuine, like, do not want to think about this at all. And it wasn't on my radar. And I think that the difference in that time, and for some people it might take more, it might take less time, but I compare like what my motives are then versus now. And a lot of what my motives were back then, I think, were driven by the culture of education, because I'd gone straight through high school, straight into an undergrad, and you're always in that kind of very academic, very competitive environment. And so it's almost like, not saying that there's an issue with unis, but I think when people are in that space, it's very easy to feel drawn towards particular professions. Like I feel like engineering gets the same rap, where there might be a lot of people that are drawn towards engineering purely because it feels like that's the pathway that one should take. But then if you stop and actually think about like, well, what does that involve? Why do I want to do it? Why would I not want to do something else? And that kind of thing. And the questions that they ask in interviews really start to pull that out. And yeah, it's just interesting, because then you give it time, and there's such a level of maturity that takes place, I think, across the 20s, especially. I'm not sure how old you all are, and I won't ask you to reveal that age or anything, but I think you could probably all agree that like from 18 and then through, there's so much that happens just in life, like outside of education, where you start to learn a lot more about who you actually are, like what you're about, what's important to you. And I think those are really important factors too. So yeah, cool. And so circling around, we've done introductions, and we don't have our fourth member here today, which is PM me your docs. So yeah. I've got some questions there, because we're going to have questions from people from subreddit, and from some of my subscribers as well. And there was one in there that I'll read it out, and it just says, there's a fourth moderator that goes by the name PM me your docs. We as a community know next to nothing about them, which is weird considering that some of us know the full names of the other three moderators, where they study, what their interests are, and what their undergrad degrees were. Ask about this fourth mysterious moderator. So I don't know if we're really going to reveal it or not. We can keep the mystery going. It's up to you guys, and perhaps up to our fourth moderator that's not here today.
Also, he posts information on his Reddit account. So that's kind of why I was a bit confused. I was like, if you look at his comment history, he's a Flinders medical student.
Right.
That's like public information. I just think he prefers to stay a bit more anonymous. I find it really worrying. People know that much information about us, but I don't know how they have that information.
I do feel like we didn't do ourselves any favor by all three of us including our first names in our Reddit. Like, I think it was pretty easy to guess what my name was from Ren 10.
Yeah,
and Liz 17, Duke Luke. Like, I think that was kind of easy to gauge. PM me or docs, not so much.
He's done much better at like the separation between online identity and real life compared to us.
Yeah, well, I just kind of assumed, because I'm not very good on social media. So I joined the subreddit a couple of days after the March results came out from my last sitting in 2021.
Oh.
When I jumped on. So I told myself, stay away from Paging Doctor. I think I caved a couple of weeks out and then was like, no, this is terrible, get off of it. And then I learned about the subreddit, but did not join it. I was like, I'm going to stay away. And then a couple of days after results came out, I joined it. So I don't really know much about subreddit either. I'm a real newbie to that. So I was just kind of under the impression that you were all using aliases anyway. Like, Renee, I didn't get your name from that at all. I was like, someone watches Ben 10. Like, I don't know.
It's my childhood nickname. So like, really, I did nothing to disguise my...
Right.
No, that would have been smart. But we didn't. I don't think any of us expected to be in this position at all. So like, when I created that Reddit account, I was like, I just want like a uni kind of Reddit account. So I'll just use my name. And I didn't realize my stress would manifest in such a way that I'd end up moderating it and people would know who I am.
Well, yeah. So when did you guys become moderators of the page?
Luke and I, October, I think.
So
I think it was after interviews but before offers last year.
Yeah, okay. So it would have been like early October.
Yeah. And then I was just like maybe a week after offers, so maybe like a month later.
Yep. Yeah. All right, and then we'll refer to them as PM me or docs, our fourth moderator. Did they join around that same time as well?
No, earlier.
A bit earlier. Okay. Right. Yeah.
They modded when I was there, like the whole time I've been part of the sub.
Yeah, same. So it's been over a year, a couple of years maybe.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. That just makes it even more mysterious that
it's
very mysterious.
So yeah, unfortunately for people watching, we're not going to have many more questions to answer there, but their comment history apparently gives enough information to learn a little bit about them. We'll keep them private for now on. Cool. And so for those, we're talking about the subreddit and we'll talk about the Discord as well. For those that are watching that may not be on it, it actually surprises me sometimes when people don't know about it, because I'm trying to I'm almost making it a religion that I will plug it almost every video more and more as we go into interviews, because like watching how it's evolved, and even like I've seen the evolution that it's had since you've kind of taken control of that page is, and this is nothing against the past moderators, it's all been really good, but there's clearly like introducing the Discord and things like that, you have all really added to people's ability to access information, to be able to interact with each other. So in a space that is otherwise perceived to be so competitive and so isolating, and that's the experience so many people have, it's really, really cool to see that you're like committing your time to be able to do this for people. For those who don't know, what is the subreddit and what is the Discord? I don't know who wants to field that one.
Do you want to go for it, Renee? You look happy.
Oh, I guess I think that the Discord kind of evolved from the subreddit. So obviously my experience from the subreddit is kind of, I think about 2 years now. I think I joined in about July 2020 as I was preparing for the September sitting. And at that point, it was just a place, like a forum to ask questions. I posted a couple of Section 2 essays on there for some feedback, but it was just a really welcoming space for people to talk about the GAMSAT and study for the GAMSAT. At that point in July, we were coming up to, I think people were preparing for interviews at that time that I wasn't involved in. So I saw the interview side of things, people coming together and organizing interview sessions, but it really was just a space for people to ask each other questions and get in contact. And then I used that pretty religiously for the next year, because I sat the September. I wasn't going to apply until the next March, and then offers weren't, were over a year away. So I just used that for any and all questions to do with postgraduate med entry. It really isn't just to do with the GAMSAT. Anything that goes for postgrad med goes there. People answer the questions. Even we get questions about undergrad med, lots of different stuff. So yeah, anything really related to med other than the UCAT space, because UCAT is for undergrad and they have their questions there. And then, yeah, so I was using that in that way. And then I think that the mods at the time all came together and decided that they wanted a Discord for a space for people to talk more openly and in a more rapid fashion, I guess. And in, how people do talk on chat apps, I guess you would call it. And so, yeah, the Discord kind of came from the Reddit. And then that's just a space for people to have conversations related to certain aspects of the postgrad med space. Interviews, practice happens in there, asking questions about all of the sections of the GAMSAT, general chat. There's lots of debates, anything that you really want to talk about when you're in that space, really. I think Liv and Luke were around. I joined after the Discord had just been created. I think it had been around for like a week or so. And I think I joined to fill that space to help moderate, because the Discord was a lot busier than the subreddit. So I guess maybe you'll be able to provide a little more context to how it came to be, but yeah.
Yeah, cool. That's really interesting. So maybe, Luke or Liv to explain how that's come about, where the idea came from.
Yeah, so, oh, sorry, you can go, Luke.
No, you go, Luke, it's all good.
Oh, I was just going to say that, so initially the subreddit, because like the one issue with Reddit is that it is very difficult to have like an actual conversation or really, any sort of meaningful discussion or anything like that, aside from, just responding to the back and forth. And that can be a bit difficult. And especially when it came to things like a lot of the time for like discussions around GAMSAT questions. And that was especially earlier on in the subreddit, that was very much a feature of the subreddit. People would post screenshots of a question and be like, can someone please explain this? Like, I don't know why this answer, I don't understand this answer. Yeah. So it just was very, very messy and quite cluttered. And it was very hard to kind of keep track of all of that. And especially as well when, having conversations around, like potentially like entry requirements and things like that. Reddit was fine for when it came to like, this blank question, there's the answer, but anything with any sort of nuance, any sort of discussion, Reddit is just terrible when it comes to that sort of stuff. So that's initially why the Discord sort of came about, because we were like, well, we want a way to actually foster this community, which was very much developing. And we really were developing a community with people, basically coming to the Reddit religiously and, engaging in these conversations. And there was, very much this sort of culture around, the actual application and, a lot of, people were, very regularly tuning in and stuff like that. And we wanted to have a way that made communication a bit easier. And we were able to sort of organize the Reddit a bit better as well, because the other thing with Reddit is that, it's just a subreddit. You can't really, you can use like flares and things like that, but it's hard to find dedicated spaces for things. So we were getting sort of the same sort of questions coming up, or the same sort of people asking the same sort of thing. Not same sort of people, but the same sort of questions were coming up. Whereas with the Discord, we're able to have different channels. So we've got a section 1 channel. So anytime someone's got a question about section 1, they can ask a question in the section 1 channel. And it's just a lot easier to kind of find the information you're looking for. It's a lot more organized. So that's sort of why we sort of started that. And it's allowed us to kind of go into things like interview prep. We've got video chats and voice chats. So people do interview practice online together, which you really wouldn't be able to do on the Reddit. So it's just sort of opened up all possibilities for what we've been able to do to actually form that community.
Okay, because that's really, because I don't know much about, so I'm going to show my age here and that I'm so far removed from Discord that and this will be helpful for me, because whenever I talk about it, if you have seen the last couple of seconds of one of my videos where I'm talking about it, I literally every time I record, I'm like, I don't know what to say about it. Because I'm like, I actually don't know what Discord is. Originally I thought it was like Facebook Messenger. And then someone recently, because someone recently told me that you were also doing like interview practice sessions. And I was like, oh, how do you do that through Messenger? That's messy. And they're like, oh, no, you're talking to them. I'm like, oh, so I'm like, it's like Zoom. So it sounds like it's like a mix. It's everything.
Yeah, so like it's kind of like you could have a ton of individual chats
Yeah.
that you can kind of group, and then you can also have channels where you can do voice and video calls, which is really helpful. And so it allows us to kind of separate everything out. So it's like they're basically many giant group chats with different topics that are all kind of collated into one place, which allows sort of fostering of a pretty strong community, like everybody prepped together. And they now practicing for interviews together. Like it's a really, I think
That's
a really
how
good
I
platform for that.
Actually, that's how Liv and I met, was interview practice. So we go back to days before even moderating. So that definitely brings us together.
Yeah. I'm the only person.
No, you go,
I was just gonna say I was the only person who was like a complete Discord newbie when it came to actually setting up the Discord. Like I had no idea what was going on. Like to end the group chat, like to end the call, I would just like force quit the app because I didn't actually know how to hang out. So like it's very much, you know, like don't worry, it's like it's not just you, Jesse. Like I'm very much I had no idea what was going on, and I've learned a lot through actually, you know, moderating. But there've been sort of group sort of interview prep sort of things, and but this is the first time I've been really involved in that.
Right. Yeah. I guess you have to learn by practice more than anything. So just thrown in the deep end.
There is a hangout button.
Yeah, or just use that. Yeah. And as well as that, I've seen on the subreddit that people do have like their flares to say who they are. And I think that was a recent addition in the last few months. And I've seen that now, like there are people on there that are health professionals. So now we've got people that are actually practicing clinicians offering advice. Yeah. So is that the same on the Discord, that you'll have people that are practicing active on the Discord, or is it more so applicants there?
More applicants. So a lot of the health professionals on the subreddit are people who were on the subreddit as medical students and as applicants themselves, because it's been around for about 10 years, maybe not 10 years. It's been around for a long time. And so a lot of those people use the subreddit. I think the Discord platform, health professionals are very busy, and it's a sort of a very rapid fire, more casual kind of platform. So
it's not quite.
We don't have that.
Yeah. And
we also didn't want to create a health professional role on the Discord, because we figured that becomes then hard to like verify. Like we can't watch the Discord as much. And so if you have people claiming to be health professionals, just like engaging in rapid fire conversation, it can create a bit of like an ethical kind of dilemma. Like we really strict about no health advice and stuff like that. And I think as soon as you have people presenting themselves as health professionals online with no verification, it can become very challenging to manage.
Problem. Yeah. That's fair. I never thought about that. Yeah. And so as well as that, it sounds like a lot of work. So someone actually asked in there, do you get paid?
No.
No, it's not a job.
Who would pay us? Yeah,
exactly.
No, it's a labor of love.
Yep. And
so would not be paying us.
So maybe like if you could detail a little bit of like the behind the scenes, how many hours do you think it would take out of your week? And I say take out like as if it's like a tedious obligation, but obviously you're all choosing to do it. How many hours commitment per week roughly is it for you guys?
Probably too much. Like I don't know, as in anyone who knows me from the subreddit last year, like Luke and I both had roughly the same number of hours on the subreddit. It was like over 250, like repulsive numbers.
Oh, wow. Like it logs it too.
Reddit did that, which is terrifying. This was before we were moderators as well. That was just our own personal engagement. So like now as mods, it like varies week to week hugely, right? But like I know for me, I spend probably, other people consider it too much. I love it though. Yep. Like it's not a drain for me. I find it really enjoyable. So I can't even put a number to it. I don't even want to put a number to it. You're not really
Liv definitely spends the most time. Like she's definitely on there the most and is kind of leading the group, even though it's just us three. But I think actually when we first started the Discord, we hadn't really set rules around what we wanted the conversations to look like. And so at the start, when I first was moderating, I was doing many hours a week, like probably like 5 hours a day on there, just trying to moderate the conversation. Yeah, there was a lot of hype around it too when it first happened. And it was during a time before the MD1s now, who had been very engaged in the subreddit the year prior, had started. So they kind of had the time to be spending on the Discord. And so it was, it was a lot more work to moderate then. But obviously, since we've started medicine, I think your priorities change, and I've definitely spent a little less time. But if you want a number, I'd say on a day that I'm like actually investing in it, like, you know, an hour or two. And then there's some days where I'm like, Liv, thank you. She's dealing with it. So
yeah. I think the initial actual setup was very, very time, like it required a lot of time. But I think now that you know, we've established the rules, we've established, you know, the culture that we sort of have on that, and people are sort of respectful of that, and it's become sort of like what's expected is sort of, you know, it's sort of encouraged, like within, like everyone sort of self-moderates now a little bit better. Like it's you know, so we're not sort of having to spend as much time sorry, just like watching it like a hawk and making sure that, you know, people aren't going off the rails or saying things. So now it's a lot more manageable. But and I think I spend a lot more time actually on the Discord, not as a moderator, but more as a contributor. Whereas before it was sort of the other way around. So like I'm still there with like the moderating presence, and you still sort of have to, you know, put the time into it. But in terms of actually moderating, the time that takes to do that it's definitely a lot less now.
It was a lot at the start. Like it was late into the night. I think our people who have partners and family members and stuff were like, will you ever get off the Discord? And it's like, if I stop looking at it for a second, it's going to burn down. Like it was really not good. But
I can imagine.
I was walking away at parties at times just to,
just to like check
down, and we would have a mod call at like 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. I was like, this is not sustainable.
I think we had calls at 2 a.m. like us, like, because there'd be something happening at 2 a.m. and I'd be in bed about to sleep, and then I'd get tagged and I'm just like, oh, I guess. And so we'd all call, and it was not great, but good memories, good bonding.
I remember like there was sort of a bit of there was an issue at some point when I was on my drive up, because I drove up from Melbourne to Brisbane when I moved, and I had no internet for like a lot of it. I was driving, and I got like to the hotel, and there's just like messages and I was like, oh dear, sorry guys, like have fun. I need to sleep.
Oh, at least you're actually choosing to sleep. It sounds like Liv and Renee were 2 o'clock. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Yeah.
And well, that kind of brings me to another question that I had was, in terms of like the behind the scenes, obviously there might be certain things that you can't talk about as well, but is there anything that you would highlight as kind of is there anything that you would pick out as the kind of highlights of moderating these forums? And also, more interestingly, is there anything that you find more tedious and monotonous or less enjoyable about the role as well?
Highlight for me has been like just actually being able to sort of follow the journey through with people, like seeing this march, like being involved as a moderator through a GAMSAT cycle, and like being able to be there with people through the doubts, through the stress, like through their sitting, the come down from that, and then the hype to results when I'm not wrapped up in that emotionally myself. That's been really amazing. And then also being able to, I think, just be able to provide support to people. And I think the difference that we're able to make through providing this platform where people can connect with people who are going through the same kind of stress, that's honestly like the absolute best part of it for me.
Yeah. Do you want to go next, Renee?
Oh, okay. Totally
can edit out the awkwardness. No, it's all good.
I feel the same way that Liv does, like watching people since I've been in go through what I went through last year, and having those joys with them. I think it also, perhaps in a little bit of a selfish way, makes me, during the hard times of med in this first semester, it really reminds me of how lucky I am to be in the position that I'm in. I was so close to not being in this position, and I know there's a lot of really, really deserving people who are trying so hard to get into med and coming up against obstacles so regularly every year. And it just reminds me how lucky I am and how grateful I should be to be in that position, and does help to motivate me to keep going and give med my all. So yeah, that's definitely a big benefit, as well as, yeah, just watching other people grow and finally, you know, get the score that they need and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, it'd be very easy to become disconnected from the application process once you're in. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, being able to stay involved and actually like literally engaging with people that are in that process and helping them through it as well would, be reminding of how competitive it really is. Yeah. And then Luke?
Yeah, I feel very similarly as well. Like, I think, yeah, definitely the highlight is sort of being able to foster that community and sort of see, just sort of seeing how, you know, how much people benefit from that sort of space, and having that connection to each other, and as well as being able to provide that support as well. And I think in particular as well, like when it comes to actually like the application process, a lot of it is very confusing, and a lot of it is quite is not very transparent. So I think a lot of people find a lot of like feel quite stressed about sort of the process and feel quite alone in that. And I really appreciate that we sort of have created that space where people are able to kind of have those conversations and share their doubts and their concerns and their fears, and provide support to each other, and, you know, receive support as well. So yeah, I think that's yeah, it's quite rewarding sort of seeing that. And, you know, I've been told by people, you know, that they really have benefited from the sub and have like thanked me for, you know, taking the time to actually, you know, develop that and sort of you know, maintain it. And, you know, and that's really nice. Not that like I'm doing it for anyone's, you know, anyone's thanks or anything like that, but it's you know, it's nice to know that the time that I put in is like so it's affecting other people, like it's affecting real people and helping real people. And I think that's really nice.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like, as well as that, it's actually really opening up the discussion about the fact that the process without something like subreddit and Discord is very isolating, because I didn't think about that in my own process back in my undergrad. I kind of see it as like two phases for me, where I constantly have to compare them. And I think back then I wasn't even really engaging with the idea that it can be so isolating, especially when you don't have people around you that are in the same process. Even if you do, like sometimes people still find that they feel like they're running their own game. So it's such a cultural shift. I think this kind of platform will have over many years too. I think it's going to be something that is obviously going to be around for a long time. To me, watching from the outside a little bit, my kind of reflection is that particularly the Discord is a real kind of pivotal moment in just the way that people approach the mentality of medicine altogether. And I wonder whether or not, and I hope that people that are going through that and engaging on those platforms and then hopefully making it into medicine are going in even more resilient, even more kind of open and, you know, willing to be vulnerable, because I think those kind of qualities are also what is really important in a healthcare professional and just in a medical student, like being able to admit things are difficult and things are upsetting, and being able to speak to people about that as well. Because I think it's, again, it might be me kind of making a very rash kind of a judgment, but medicine also has that intimidation factor to it, in that it's very elite, it's very competitive. And so this kind of breaks that down and humanizes it again, and like breaks down those barriers that people might have put up in their head as well. Yeah.
I know something that we've all tried to do, and I did it a lot last year, not on purpose, is just be very honest about our experience. Like, I felt so alone going through my application process, and that's why I spent 256 hours or whatever it was on the subreddit. Like, and all of that was really openly sharing my experiences, and probably some of what I wrote is a bit cringe in hindsight. I don't look back through it, but
we're going to search.
Yeah, no. But I know that people have reached out and said they really appreciated how honest I was about, in many ways, how much I was suffering through that process, because I think people connect with that. And I think people seeing other people be vulnerable in that space, not just me, but many of our users, it allows them to be open and be like, actually, no, this process is awful. And like, it feels awful. And to be able to just share that with other people is so special. And I do think that if we can have a culture of being able to share how terrible this whole process is a lot of the time, that if we carry that into medical school, then that's one, only going to benefit our mental health, but then two, can potentially help shift that culture to being more open about how hard, well, probably up until consultant job is for a lot of people.
There's probably new phases to come, I'm sure. that
New
you're
suffering at every stage.
it's just not to
Just keep
sound
going.
too dark and everything about it, but there's
No,
going to be difficult times ahead. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think like the thing is the process itself is like it is inherently quite isolating because first of all, you've got, you know, it's very competitive and a lot of people can be quite competitive about that. And it can be quite intimidating to deal with that. But also the process is it's something that if you haven't actually gone through it yourself, it's so difficult to explain. So I've, you know, even, you know, being so involved, you know, I've, you know, tried to explain, you know, the process to my family multiple times and, you know, they just still do not get it. They don't understand like, oh, well, why can't you just apply to this uni? Or why can't you just do this? Or like, why can't you just transfer? Why can't you do like, you know, it's like so many like little questions like that, that when you're sort of going through it by yourself, it can feel like you're the only person going through it. And, you know, and for, you know, other ways, you know, a lot of people are quite private about, you know, their application process. You know, I've been very transparent, you know, with most of the people in my life that, you know, I'm pursuing medicine. But for a lot of people, I've spoken to many people who said, you know, I haven't even told my parents I'm doing this. I haven't told anyone that I'm applying because I don't want to be rejected and have people, you know, ask me or it to be awkward or uncomfortable. And so I think having a space where people are able to share and, you know, discuss their fears and, you know, the application process with other people, especially if they don't really have anyone in you know, their actual real life that they're able to have those conversations with, I think that's so helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something that I thought a lot about in the last couple of months now that I'm kind of midway through the application process. And I thought about like, why did I make the channel? I'm like, sometimes it's very, I want to be very open about it. And so like a video that did quite well was the one where I talked about like, I had the little soup Nazi in the thumbnail about like why I didn't get an interview last year. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to talk about exactly what is involved in this and prove that like everybody's application is completely different and no one experience is ever going to be the same, but there's shared difficulties in it.
Yeah.
And like, it's the same thing where like, for me with the channel, sometimes some of the videos are very much, they feel like a personal journal entry, but there's something very cathartic about that, being able to just go, you know what, this is what's happening this week and this is what's involved. And then, you know, other people are going to be like, yep, I'm 100% with you. Or they'll watch it and they'll be like, oh, look, someone else is in the same boat. Because even like applying last year, a lot of people, like obviously a lot of my clients and a lot of my students would know that I was in that process. And then sometimes I would say things and I wasn't really trying to like have a really deep, heavy conversation with them, but they just might ask, oh, what's going on with applications? And sometimes they'd ask me like every week. I'm like, there's like 3 months until the next stage.
More waiting. Yeah.
More waiting. And they still sometimes ask, and it's nothing against them because a lot of people, when they're not involved in it, don't know. But then, you know, and I might say things like, I never try to get ahead of myself. And I'd be like, look, I'm just going to wait and see what happens. But their version of comfort will just be, oh, you're smart, you'll get in. And it's like, yeah. Sometimes that's actually hard to take because it's like, that's really not the reality of it. It's not as simple as just, oh, you're a smart person. So, you know, therefore you will get in, because there's just so many different hurdles. And truthfully, there's so many things that are somewhat arbitrary. And I mean, that's probably a good segue to GAMSAT in some senses.
Yep.
Speaking of arbitrary.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, well, jumping into GAMSAT, I had the first question. It's a bit of a loaded question, I think, but it was really just, what are your thoughts on the value of GAMSAT as a selection tool? Because obviously you've all gone through it. Everyone watching this is in that process right now. They're either preparing for September, or they're worried if their results are good enough from March, or they're worried about next year's SIT. Yeah, what are your thoughts on it as a selection tool for medical schools?
This could be controversial. I think it's terrible. As in, I think it has some value in that the medical schools need to cull an enormous amount of applicants, and the GAMSAT does that. It's like it is accomplishing the goal in many ways of what they're trying to do. I think ACE's lack of transparency and the lack of quality practice materials and things like that mean that it comes down to a lot of luck on the day to see if like the test fits the way you've kind of prepped for it. And I do think there's a bit of an argument, the GAMSAT is measuring something like inherent. Like we get arguments all the time on the subreddit. Is the GAMSAT some kind of IQ test? And we've talked tons about that, but it's just not. And so it's like people's scores oscillate so much. Luke's a good example of that. Like, and it's not like people's reasoning is dropping 15 points between sittings. Like, you're not decaying cognitively at that rate. That's just not real life. And therefore, I think we have to call into question like whether it's actually the best way to be picking out the traits we want in doctors, or if it is a bit more sort of luck and a bit more arbitrary than probably ASAR and the universities would like to admit.
Yeah, and I think that's like, I learned that a lot. I was someone who, I think I made a video on it where I talked about that, where if you asked me on the day of results last year, part of me would have just been like, no, it's a good test. Because of course, like I'm happy with my score. I'm like, yeah, it's a great test.
When you do well, it's easy to be like, it's a great test and it's measuring my IQ and I'm a genius.
Yeah.
Like, and a lot of people argue.
Fall into that. It's very, very like self-satisfying kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then sitting it this time around, I knew that like there's no way I was going to repeat it. And I was like, this is like part of me sitting it again was like, I want to prove that this has nothing to do with measuring someone's ability. There is a level of arbitrariness, if that's a word, to it, in that scores will fluctuate, and it comes down to, and it just proved it to me. Like when I walked away from it, I was like, I was so much luckier last year, like than I was this year, and it could have gone both ways. So yeah, I think it proves that point in a lot of ways. We're obviously just speculating because we're not ASA, and nobody knows what the minds of ASA are doing.
Well, and they will never tell us. So
they will never tell us. But yeah, I'd agree with that. Luke, what about your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I have a lot of opinions on this, and I've got a unique perspective in that I've sat the GAMSAT 4 times, and I've had multiple different approaches with it. So my first sit, I didn't study at all. I literally just went in blind, was like, we'll see how we go. The second sit was my best sit, and it was about 5 weeks after I had a pretty major operation, and I was still on some pretty hardcore pain meds. I had to have like adjustments because I needed breaks because I couldn't sit for long periods of time. That was my best score. Yep. My third sitting, I literally studied for probably 2 to 3 hours a day, most days for the majority of summer. It was definitely my most, the one I prepared the most for, and was my worst sitting. And then I sat again in September, again, no studying, Hail Mary, just was like, my score's expiring, might as well just sit it again. In that time, I scored, I'll just say my scores, just to explain. I got 63, then I got a 66, 62, 64. So all around the same, like around about the same, you know, within a couple points, which, you know, you're like, okay, that's fairly consistent. My individual sections, the only score I consistently improved in was section 1, and that was the one that I actually found, I felt I was able to prepare the best for. Section 2 was fluctuated quite a bit. Section 3 was consistently my best section for the first 2 sittings, and then dropped 15 points, as Liv alluded to earlier. And then again, the sitting after that in September was also, yeah, it was about 5 points lower than my best sit. So there's quite a bit of fluctuation. So even though my scores remain fairly consistently, the actual breakdown of my individual section scores wildly inconsistent. Anywhere from 59 to 73, 55 to 69, like literally all over the place. And so I think because of that, I definitely feel very much from sitting the test 4 times, my experience sitting the test was very different. Each time I sat, particularly for, you know, some of the sections, it very much felt like I was sitting a different test. So I feel like, you know, on the day, what you get can very much factor into it. And I'm not going to say that the GAMSAT's completely useless. I don't think that, but I definitely think that luck plays into it a lot more than sometimes we'd like to admit. And sometimes we would feel comfortable admitting, considering how important it is in the actual application process, because it can be really hard to actually sit with the fact that, okay, this potentially might not actually be an objective measure, and I might just be being screwed over, and there's nothing I can do about it. That can be quite disempowering. So I don't want to say that, you know, the GAMSAT is something that you can't prepare for, that you can improve, or anything like that. I definitely disagree with that. But I think that, you know, we have to be very careful with the way we discuss the GAMSAT and the way that, you know, we treat the GAMSAT. We're not treating it with this sort of level of, oh, okay, it's this perfect test that's, you know, 100% a measure. And if you do amazing in the GAMSAT, you're ultimately great. And if you don't, sorry, tough shit, you're going to be a terrible doctor. Oh, sorry, I probably can't swear. Tough luck. Tough luck, you know. So I think that, you know, you can put the effort in and you can see improvement. And I've definitely done that. But I also think that really when it comes down to it, there are a lot of factors outside of our control. And I think because of that, it can't really be treated as this ultimate great test that sometimes it's claimed to be. Yeah, so that's sort of my thoughts. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded.
No, it's great. And I think there's a baseline in terms of like people preparing for it. You can definitely prepare for it. Like, it's not like it's something you should just walk in and just wing it and see how it goes.
Yeah.
Clearly, people who put time in do improve their scores. But I think there's kind of like a ceiling of how much your preparation will dictate the score before it starts to move into what questions you're going to get. What, like the essay section, you've only got 2 themes for the whole thing to demonstrate your ability to communicate. It's like, and it could be on anything. There's so much luck that can be involved there.
And the inconsistency between the papers as well, I think, can call into question standardization. Like, I understand with section 2, different people will find different themes of different difficulties, but there are also some themes where it's like, what on earth? Like, most people will find this ridiculously difficult versus, I won't disclose my topics, but mine were like pretty straightforward, pretty topical. Like, I had a lot to say, and I would be lying if I said that the fact I just got topics that suited me and were probably quite easy didn't play into my section 2 score. Like, and I think that a lot of section 3 papers seem to have wildly different content between sittings. Not that people should be discussing that, but they do. And that also can make it a bit like, well, how on earth is this comparable between papers? Because you're not all taking the same one. You're not even taking the same exam.
Yeah.
I don't know how statistically it works out that they can standardize when you're,
Yeah. Even the fact that the last few years there's been like some online and face-to-face, like there's been so the ones sat at home versus the proctored ones versus the in-test center. Like,
when your section 3 is on a different day.
Yeah. I don't know how they adjust for that, but Renee, you're shaking your head at that. I mean, I think I already know your opinion on it.
Yeah, look, I'm pretty much in agreement with everything that's been said. We've had lengthy discussions about this sort of stuff with Luke and I very regularly, so I feel the exact same way. I think that the GAMSAT, whether it does or doesn't, I think it attempts to select for a certain type of individual with a level of reasoning skill that, whether it does or not, which I would probably argue that it doesn't, but it attempts to. And I think that what it attempts to identify in an individual is an outdated way of looking at what a doctor should possess anyway, whether it achieves that or not. I think that, a high level of reasoning is a good thing to have, but it's not the be all and end all of being a physician. And I struggle in my day-to-day in med school to draw comparisons between what I'm learning at that time and the skills that I need to do well in my course and eventually as a physician, and the skills that I use in the GAMSAT. I never think, oh yeah, the GAMSAT really prepared me for understanding this or being able to do well in this course. So yeah, when I just try to draw those parallels, I fail to do so. So I think that is quite reflective of its relevance to selecting a good doctor, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think as someone who I have to obviously spend a lot of time analyzing that test and thinking about what is it assessing, it's very textbook heavy. Like, it's still very much academic and not skills based. And it's so strange because a medical degree is ultimately, like, I still see it as it's a vocational degree. Like, it's very much about job practice, job skills. And that is where people are going to actually become good doctors. And I've always had this feeling like as you said before, Liv, that they have to have something to cull down the numbers, of course. But it's kind of crazy that the first hurdle that's the largest number of people are probably going to be pulled out of is going to be on something that ultimately isn't going to lead to skills, as you said, Renee, like, it isn't going to lead to skills that are actually transferable to a medical degree. And also it's entry into a degree where it's like, if someone doesn't have the ability to like take a blood sample or something, it's like these are all things, like the actual stuff that matters is all going to be trained. And the goal is to basically get someone who is a blank canvas that is teachable, that is ready to take on feedback and learn, and obviously has empathy, compassion for others, kind of service attitude. Putting those together, they're kind of building the doctor in the medical degree. Yeah. So it's very strange when it's like, hey, can you read this weird graph? Like,
you can teach those skills.
Yeah.
Having people who are good people is so much more important. Like, having people who have the personality that suits the profession. And I also just think it's worth noting that I think I read a study. There's a lot of studies on the GAMSAT that are very interesting. And one of them tried to correlate GAMSAT performance with clinical performance in their intern year. zero correlation. And like, I feel like we should be trying to get measures that somehow correlate with performance as a doctor, which I understand is probably a bit vague and hard to characterize, but like, if it's not doing that, then what's the point? Like, is it an academic hurdle? Because we have GPA. Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, unless there's something behind it. Yeah, like that GPA is not, like, I mean, I would always vouch don't use GPA.
And that's fine, yeah.
So it works against me right now.
Yeah.
But like, you're right. Like there's still a huge weight on the academic side of things. Whereas like looking at it now, like things like Casper, for example, that Wollongong use, that's an interesting one because they're saying that helps them kind of start to work out who's going to be likely to perform well in interviews, so they're not wasting people's time, which is a really efficient way to approach it. But at the same time, it's clearly assessing people's communication skills, their interpersonal skills, their empathy. So it proves that there is the ability to morph a standardized test that tests EQ rather than IQ, even though that is not an IQ test, like we'll say academic ability, because ultimately someone could be brilliant at reading a graph or pulling out mathematical relationships from data, but it means nothing if they've got to tell a family member that, you know, a sick person is going to get sicker or something like that. It just doesn't, there's just literally a huge barrier divide between those two things. So it's a strange one.
I think that's my biggest gripe with the GAMSAT is that there is no other alternative. You know, at least in Australia for postgrad, the only option that doesn't use the GAMSAT is Monash, and it's only available for Monash students who've done particular degrees, and it's only based on the academic performance. So that's not an option for most people. And I think that, you know, I don't think that the GAMSAT is there, that is objective enough, that it is, you know, as good at its job that it's designed to be. I'm trying to be very careful the way I'm talking about this. But, you know, I don't think it's sort of there in that it can be held to be sort of this decider of fate, and there's no other option. If there was another option, you know, if there were universities that had, you know, for example, like a GPA only school, or you know, schools that took different things, because like, to be honest, I feel similarly about most aspects of the actual application. You know, GPA is also something that's very subjective. GPA is something that can be affected by a whole bunch of other factors, and I don't think someone who necessarily has a lower GPA is academically not as capable of doing as well as someone else. You know, my first bachelor's degree, I had my GPA was definitely not competitive, and that's why I've done extra study. And I was lucky that I had the ability to do that, and I had the support from, you know, people around me to be able to do that. And if I didn't, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be able to do it. And it's not because I'm not smart enough or I wasn't able to. It's just, you know, I faced unique barriers that prevented me from actually being able to, you know, do as well as I could the first time around. And that's not really, you know, anything about that. And same with the things like interview, you know, people will sometimes be like, oh, well, the interview is sort of like this, you know, that's sort of like the one that's, you know, they're just sort of making sure that you're not, you know, that you're just a good person, that you're not, you know, terrible or anything like that. But the interviews are super subjective as well. No one wants to, you know, people do well in the interview and they're like, oh, you know, yes, I'm just a better person than everyone else. That's just how it is. But that's not true at all. It's also just as subjective. You know, the people who are marking are human. So it's really difficult, and it's something I've been really struggling with, in that I'm so frustrated with the way that the system's set up, and I feel like it's just fundamentally unfair. But I also have no idea where I would even start to even address it or change anything. You know, so it's almost like, you know, on one hand, I want to get rid of the GAMSAT, because I'm like, well, not get rid of, you know, I want, you know, I wish that the GAMSAT wasn't as important as it sort of is in this process. But at the same time, I don't even know what we'd be able to replace it with. And getting rid of that puts more importance on things like GPA, things like interview, which also aren't perfect in their own right as well. So it kind of becomes a sort of like, well, there's no real solution here. And by taking away something, you're giving power to something else. And it's just, you know, there's nothing that's perfect either way. So yeah, it's very much difficult to kind of balance that. And I don't really know. So I really, you know, I feel for the people in admissions, and that, you know, their job is very difficult. Like I will give them that. You know, the job is very difficult to actually decide how to actually assess applicants, especially when it's so competitive and there are so many people who would be great.
Yeah. It's, well, good luck to the people at UNDA and University of Wollongong that have to basically delineate between portfolio value. Like, I don't know how they do it, but I want none of that. So yeah, good luck to them. And so we had a few here. This section, we've got quite a few questions from followers, from subscribers, and people on the subreddit as well. So there was one from a commenter that just asked, how to absolutely ace section 1 of the GAMSAT. And I think from before in our conversations, everyone pointed to Luke to be the person to answer that question. So Luke, can you enlighten us on?
Sure. Yeah, so my section 1, is the only section I've consistently improved in through preparation. So my first sitting, I got a 59, and my last sitting, most recently in September, I got a 73. And I saw significant improvement between my third and my second and my third sitting. And I changed the approach that I sort of studied around that time. And essentially what it was is that I had a template of an Excel spreadsheet, and I just basically tracked everything that I was doing. So I would go through, I was using, practice materials online, and ASA materials, all those sorts of things. I would, spend the time answering the questions. I would, track my answer. If I had time and I wasn't doing it, like if I wasn't answering the question to time, I would write a little bit of information on like why I chose the answer I did. And I might actually link the spreadsheets, like maybe in this video, I'll give you the link, Jesse, and you can kind of put them in. But essentially, in doing that, I actually had to really think about the evidence about the questions. Because I think in my experience and from what I've seen in discussions around section 1 is there's a lot of conversation around whether or not you can actually improve section 1. And a lot of people think it is something that's sort of more innate, that it's more, it's not as like logical as something like section 3 where, there's a right answer, there's a wrong answer. It's a bit more subjective. And I initially did feel that way, but through actually preparing, I've noticed that it's actually a lot more similar to section 3 than I think a lot of people give it credit for. It's just the same thing, but just in a different kind of paint. And if you treat it the same way that you treat section 3, which is, in my experience, quite methodical, you go through, you find the information in the STEM, you try and find the reasons that essentially prove the other answers wrong. That's sort of the way I approach it. Okay, well, that's not right because the evidence is against that. And in doing that, you have to actually be quite methodical about the way you approach the question. And so you're not bringing in your own personal emotions and your own thoughts around that. And I think that through actually tracking the changes, I was able to actually notice where I was potentially making assumptions or putting my own perspective into that and taking subjectivity that wasn't actually there. And I think as well, with it being less science heavy and less technically challenging in quotation marks, I think people potentially go into section 1 with a higher thinking that they might be more equipped to handle it than they would section 3, and so therefore maybe overestimate their abilities. And so when they don't do as well as they expect, they think, oh, well, it's just the test. Like you can improve section 1. But I think that you can improve it in a similar way that you can with section 3. And that, and again, going back to what we were talking before, that, it is subjective. It depends on the day, questions, all that sort of stuff. That's still valid here. But I think, approaching section 1 very logically and looking for the evidence and, tracking those changes, I think made a huge difference for my prep. And I definitely, after doing, I did hundreds of questions and I got towards the end, I was like, okay, I actually understand what they're asking here. And I know what to look for. I know what they mean when they're trying to ask these questions. And I can pick out sort of where these might be red herrings. And I think that definitely comes from practice. But I think, having that mindset switch of going from, okay, well, this is just, it's open to interpretation. It's, some poem that, you could definitely take it all the other way. This answer definitely could be right because the test is designed not to be like that. There is one correct answer and there's a reason why the answer is right. And you wouldn't do that with section 3 where, you think that molecule potentially could also be the correct answer because there's a reason why it's not. So it's similar with section 1, in my opinion. And I think, although that's a bit of a harder pill to swallow initially, it can be hard to kind of be like, okay, I've actually got to be very logical about it. I think in doing so, you improve quite a bit from there. And I definitely improved a lot after sort of changing my approach to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So does that make sense? Sorry, I don't know if I explained it very well.
Absolutely. Because as you were saying that, like I was thinking that it sounds very much like the way you're reflecting on that is very much the same as the realizations people have with section 3 when it starts to click, when they start going, oh, I'm just like seeing it's actually the other way around, seeing the trees for the forest, like seeing the forest for the trees. No, seeing the trees for the forest, getting it the other way and actually seeing the individual points that they're pinpointing rather than trying to take on all the information at once and kind of taking this generalized interpretation. Yeah,
definitely. And so I used my spreadsheets and I would essentially track all of my answers. If I was doing it timed, I would just put the answer down, and then I would spend a lot of time reviewing. I think that's something as well that a lot of people sort of dismiss when it comes to actually GAMSAT prep. In my experience, I spent more time actually reflecting on my answers and reflecting on the correct answer than actually answering the questions. Probably almost a 2-to-1 ratio. So sitting there, going through, okay, I got that question wrong. This is what the answer says. Okay, I'm going to go through and see, why did I think that this was the correct answer? This is why I did. And this is the evidence as to why that was wrong. And then I can go, okay, this is what I'm going to do next time. And, write a little comment. Okay, make sure that you're not making assumptions about someone's tone when it's not there. Things like that. And also with my spreadsheets is I track sort of the types of changes I would make. So, and this is I found very helpful for section 3 as well, but also for section 1, in that I think a lot of people, and I mean, you probably have experience with this in terms of like, seeing people who are preparing for the GAMSAT as well. In that, I like for section 3, you do need sort of that base content understanding. But I think a lot of people, when they get a question wrong, they might run to, okay, I need to brush up on my asset-based knowledge. When really the reason they got the question wrong isn't because they have any issue with the knowledge, it's because they misread the question or they misinterpreted something in the STEM. And it's very similar to section 1. So I was, making down, okay, is it because I don't understand what that word means? In which case I need to, work on my vocabulary, or did I just misinterpret the question? Or did I, just jump for that question without looking at the other options or, looking for the evidence there? And I found that super helpful to sort of track what I was getting wrong. And over time, I was able to kind of reflect, sort of know what my base assumptions were and kind of try and challenge those when I was actually on the test, sitting down and going, okay, no, I jumped the gun a bit there, have a think about it, go through it, take a deep breath, work through it like that. And I found that really helpful. And practicing to time as well. I think time is really so important in the GAMSAT. Going in, having, okay, I'm going to be doing a certain number of questions in a potential amount of time. I would try and do that in prep. I would go, I do like 30-minute sits where I'd go, okay, I want to do 20 questions. I can't remember exactly what it was, something like that. Smash them out, to time. And I felt on the day that definitely helped me a lot. So that's sort of my approach to section 1. But I'll link all of the information, like the spreadsheets and things like that.
Yeah, that'll be really good.
That, definitely, I found that was definitely very important in my prep.
Yeah. Well, I think as well, the 2-to-1 ratio of reflecting versus answering questions is like, that's kind of the same way that I approach section 3 for me. And it's the advice that I always give is that you're going to get more generalized skills and understanding from spending time reflecting on why an answer is right or wrong and what the hints were, rather than spending too much time just pumping out questions. Because when you're answering a question, you're only learning how to answer that question. Versus if you break down the STEM and you can look at, where were they hinting at it? Like, I often try to approach questions, and I won't say that, speaking broadly here rather than about section 1, because I always say that I don't really understand section 1 still, despite trying to use this last sit to understand it more. But my kind of approach is always like, what was it that they hinted at or gave me that was letting me answer this without outside knowledge, like without having to bring in some extra understanding of the world if it was section 1? Or because I found that was where my errors often were, was that I was trying to bring in like what I knew about poetry analysis from outside. Whereas what I should have done is just been looking at the words that were in front of me and just going, where are the links every time, and just being very, as you said, methodical. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And so as well as that with GAMSAT, I'll move through a few of these a little bit faster, I think, just because I know we've got medical school to talk about, and I know a lot of people are very interested to hear your experiences there. But someone asked, and I don't know if this one can actually be answered, on average, what is the trend comparing raw scores to final marks? So I'm assuming they're meaning like percentage accuracy to performance scores in a section, but obviously that's probably more a behind the scenes thing from ASA.
You can't, as in like short answer. Well, it's the whole answer. We can't, as in there's like the website like fearthecow.net or whatever that kind of allows people to like, but it was wildly inaccurate for me. It's been somewhat accurate for other people. I don't think you can know, because as well, like the scaling of that paper on that day, like maybe an 85% in the blue section 1 or something would correlate, but like the exams are not the same, and the scores don't represent percentages, they represent abilities. And so depending on like the relative difficulty of the exam, like it's just too.
I figured that would be the case. And I think as well, you can also see that well, one is like the only thing we've got to go off is subjective like anecdotes. So people are saying like, I average this percentage, and then they're assuming that on the day they get the same percentage, and they're assuming that the way that the test was kind of organized was very much similar to the practice tests. We know that the practice tests are about as outdated as you can get, so they're becoming less and less useful as a tool in terms of replicating the exam.
So to the 10-year anniversary.
Yeah, we'll have a little celebration party for him. Put a bit of pressure on Tom, release a new one. A small one in there, and I think we kind of got onto it, but we didn't quite talk about it. I'm very outspoken on this channel. Feel free to be outspoken about it as well. I'm sure you are. I've got in there about tackling the predatory prep companies. I try to be as outspoken as possible. I try to be personally, I try to be very careful, because obviously as someone, and I try not to mention on the channel, someone who does tutoring on the side for GAMSAT, it's something that I'm very, very mindful of, because obviously my kind of MO with the channel is do not pay for stuff. And I know you guys are 100% pushing that, which is brilliant. And I think it's almost like part of why I push people to the Discord whenever they ask questions about where can I get advice for this, or where can I get feedback, blah, blah. I will just tell them, go there, because people should not have to be paying for stuff. And that is 100% my view. Obviously, we know that there are a lot of prep companies that are set up. And to me, it just seems very much like a chance to profiteer off of people's fear and people's anxiety. And following that a little bit more closely in the past year, it only reinforced my understanding of that. And like the fact that those assessments were really true, because you start to see the people that unfortunately, and to anyone watching who has paid for a course, I know some people say they've been really helpful and there's been positive things said, but overall, I think we all know that a generalized course is never going to be a very effective way to study, and especially not going to be an efficient use of someone's hard-earned money. When we're talking about people that are either still a full-time student and don't have a full-time income, or someone who is on a full-time income but is sacrificing their income. Like, I know a lot of people that work full-time and they take 6 months out of work and they live off of their partner's income or off of savings so they can focus on their study. And then people are still potentially sinking some of their savings into like $5,000 courses and things. I guess I don't really know if there's a huge amount of a question here. I think this is more of like a positioning statement. But I think that the subreddit and the Discord is hopefully going to be the thing that puts a lot of pressure on that system and to hopefully break it down. My goal with the channel is that ideally it takes away the value proposition of any of these companies. So that, like, I've never really said that publicly, but my ultimate goal is that anything that they're claiming people should pay for is now already freely available. And I think that the subreddit and the Discord are doing that as well. Like you guys, like interview prep, for example, being able to run full simulated interview prep. There's no need for someone to pay for a course. Like, there really isn't. Like, I get that feedback from medical students that have gone through that process is really good. That's probably the closest you could get to good feedback. And you're all on there. So like, you know what I mean? And the same thing with GAMSAT courses is, I think there's value to tutoring, but I don't think that everyone needs to pay for a tutor. And I think that it's actually better. It would be a much better system if no one ever needed to, because the playing field was level, because all it does is just creates more inequities to access again. So I guess, like, is that something that is front and center in the way that you orchestrate the platforms as well, that's something that you're trying to target to make sure that people are gaining access and removing the demand for prep companies?
Oh, silence.
I don't know who wants to rip in first, but
Do you want to go for it, Renee?
Someone. You just look like you're going to talk. The power of editing.
I can edit that out for sure.
Luke, you go.
Oh, okay. Yes, short answer, yes. Like, I think that, there can be benefit to, paying for prep in some ways, and that, like, if you need advice, if you want to pay for a tutor and things like that. We're not anti, paying for prep services or anything like that.
Yeah.
What we're against is predatory prep companies that are, very much, as you said, profiting off people's fear, of people's concerns, and really not being very upfront and honest about the way that they're approaching things. Like I think a lot of the time, these companies will have, their flashy logos and their, all of their stats and all that sort of stuff. But then when it comes down to it, who actually is doing the tutoring, who actually, like, there's no vetting or anything like that. There's not very much transparency about it. And, majority of the time, you don't really know what you're actually paying for. And I'm trying to be very careful the way I'm talking about that. But, I think that there are a lot of empty promises, and a lot of, I think that they're ultimately, they're for profit, and that's sort of how you've got to approach it, in that they really don't care if you get into med school. They don't really care at all.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, they just want your $5,000. So, whether or not you get in or not, obviously it's, they would like you to get in the, it reflects well on them. But if you don't, and you're willing to pay another $5,000, sweet, So it's not like they're not really invested either way. They don't really mind. And so, if people want to use prep companies, that's fine. But I feel that the issue is that the landscape, at least previously, was very much, heading towards, essentially you need a prep company. Like when I was, initially sitting the GAMSAT, I didn't actually use a prep company, but I was one of the only people who I knew friends-wise, like in my friendship group, who were sitting the GAMSAT and things like that, who did. Most people, did pay the $5,000 because that's what was expected, and that's sort of what you do. And if you pay for this fancy course, you're going to get a great GAMSAT, you're going to get straight in. And it's like, first of all, there's no guarantee of that, and second of all, there are other options. And I think that that's something that's really important that we want to share, and that there are other options. You don't have to pay for this, and there are plenty of ways that you can get the same experience without paying that much money. And I think that's part of the reason why we're so passionate about that, and why we're so strict on what we allow on the sub. Like you asked about whether or not that's intentional. We have a very strict no solicitation policy on the sub and on the Discord. If people are asking for a tutor, we'll let them ask, and people can say, yep, I'm happy to. But we're not going to let people be like, we're advertising our $150,000 course, and message us for information. We're very conscious of that, because we really want to build a space where people don't feel pressured to do that, because outside of that space, and before there was that conversation around not needing prep companies, that was very dominant. I remember my first sit walking out the GAMSAT, and people were crying because they were so stressed about the GAMSAT, and there were people handing out flyers to their prep companies. It's like, that's just so not ethical. That's just so wrong.
Yeah.
And obviously it's a lot better now, and that I don't think people are still doing that. I don't know, maybe.
They still send their emails out.
They still send their emails, so it's very predatory.
Sign up today for your course.
For me, that was the thing. So like I said, I got a second round offer. So I got, if you want to call it an EOD, for offers for this intake. And the first, I was really in shock when I got my rejection. And then the first thing that made me cry was an email from being like, missed out this year, don't worry, pay $5,000 and we'll get you into med school next year. Like that was, and in that moment, I kind of felt like, should I have done that? I didn't get an interview prep course. Maybe I should have done that. And now I've wasted another year of my life. And would I pay $5,000 right now to get into med school? Yeah, probably, because I feel so terrible. So yeah, it's that predatory behavior that I know so many other people experience, that we really, really don't like. And we've also kind of, come to the conclusion that the only real valuable thing, I mean, I've never done a prep course, so I don't want to say the only thing, but the most valuable thing that a prep course offers is the accountability. You've paid the money, so it keeps you accountable to do the hours to study. So I guess what we're trying to provide through the subreddit and mainly the Discord is that level of accountability. We've set up accountability rooms. Whether we'll keep those going, we're not sure, but we've tried to come up with strategies to keep people accountable to their study. And when you create a community where people know you and are invested in your journey, that keeps you accountable. Like I'm sure the YouTube keeps you accountable, Jesse. Like knowing that people are invested in your journey and you have a community around you does keep you accountable, and it doesn't cost anything. So I think that that's kind of our way of taking that value from prep companies and giving it to people for free.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's exactly what's needed. Like, it's effectively like re-democratizing the application process again. Like, it would be good to be able to see. I genuinely think it can happen. I think in the next few years that the more and more, because clearly, like, people are much more wise to the tactics of predatory prep companies now. It's really good to see that people are just like laughing it off, like, yeah, that email won't work on me, that ad won't work on me, and this and that, because it means it's just less and less money grabbing that they can use. But you're right, like they still, I made like a burner account, a burner email, so that I could be on the email subscriptions of a few of them, just so I know what they're up to and what they're doing. Which if people follow my Instagram stories, they'll see that sometimes I'm giving them a hard time, and I don't know whether or not they see them, but I kind of hope they do. But anyway, I won't name names or anything like that, but it's always fun, because I think that it needs to be dealt with, and that's probably something that I think, Luke, you and I would talk. Like, I briefly mentioned that there might be something that I'm going to try and do in terms of putting a bit of pressure on that, because there's something that just doesn't seem right about some potentially misrepresenting the service, and, like, as you said, Luke, like, not vetting who's involved, and then not releasing who's actually behind the service as well, just talking about the company. And then, as well as that, there are some claims that are just blatantly wrong, like in terms of guarantees or in terms of certainties or the way things work. And when really, I'm always very open about saying that ultimately, whenever anyone's talking about GAMSAT, doesn't matter who they are, they're guessing. Like, it is ultimately guessing, because ASA is very, very good at keeping it private, as they should, to be honest. Like, they should keep their policies and their process completely private, because otherwise it destroys the application process. And so, yeah, I mean, it's probably just a bit of a rant from all of us, but yeah, I would hope that kind of culture ends, and hopefully it's on the way out now. Yeah.
We would love to. I think that was a mission of ours, is to basically make it so that prep companies are just obsolete. Like, because you have to think about it. Like, let's say they are $5,000. Actually, it is a guaranteed spot in medical school. It's not, but let's just assume it is. The equity barrier, like, that's a huge problem. Like, if it's that you can pay $5,000 and you're now equipped with a skill set that students who can't afford the fight, like, how is that helping? That's not a positive thing. And so we want it to be that, regardless of the value prep companies provide, which is probably low, but let's just try and be neutral, that we could provide something so that students who don't necessarily have the money, which I didn't, like, most, as if I'm going to pay that, so that they can get the same value, and then they have the same opportunity for free, and perhaps a better service than what the prep companies can provide.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, like, I'm always so happy when I see a comment on my channel, and this is like backpatting to me now, but whenever I see a comment on my channel where someone's like, I was just about to spend $2,000 on a course and I found crash courses, I'm going to do this instead. Or I put it in my survey thing where I was asking for people's feedback, and I put it in there as a bit of fun, just like, can you give me an estimate on how much money you've now not spent as a result of this channel? And it's so interesting to see that data. Like, I haven't gone through it fully, but it's going to average somewhere like $1,500–2,000 a person. And that blew my mind, of just how committed people were to spending money. And it means there's still people out there that are not accessing either my channel or the Discord and the subreddit, but hopefully over time it'll continue to collect more attention from people. And
we hope so.
It's exactly that. It's just, well, what else does a prep company have to offer if everything is freely available at that point? There's really nothing they can do. So yeah, hopefully that's the way we're headed. All right, so I might move on just a little bit. So we'll segue through with interview prep, because obviously that's happening at the moment for everybody, myself included. I'm a little bit nervous, because I did my first proper, like, practice session with someone during the week, and it didn't go to plan. It didn't go as well as I would hope. But so someone just put interview prep, not even a question, just interview prep.
No question.
So I might go round. Renee, I might start with you for UQ, and we'll come to Luke, and then Liv for UniMelb. You can speak broadly, but also, because you obviously interviewed at UQ, then probably makes more sense that you'd speak to your experience there. What kind of tips would you have for people that are preparing for interviews at the moment?
Yeah. I think that my biggest tip, and something that I didn't do, and if I was to do it again, I would change, would be to practice with a wide variety of people. When I did my interview practice, I knew that I needed to practice a lot. I knew that I needed to practice regularly, and I knew I needed to practice in lots of different ways, lots of different questions, and really challenge myself. And I did do that. And I think that was very beneficial. So they're my other tips, but practicing with a wide variety of people, because I had a practice group. We were all just applicants. We didn't have anyone there who was a med student or anything like that, which was obviously hard to do anyway. The most experience we had in the group was someone who'd interviewed the year prior and hadn't gotten in. So it's practicing with those people. I had a very limited range of opinions, a very limited range of views and advice that was available to me. And we were all learning together as we were going, and kind of taking like skills and ways of interviewing off each other, and kind of morphing into this one style that wasn't necessarily the best style to use. So I definitely think my biggest tip from my experience is to jump on our Discord. Just find a group or a fair few different people, or challenge yourself to continuously practice with many different people. If you can find a med student who's your friend, or through the Discord, through the subreddit, to practice with you, I think that's a really good idea, because I definitely think from my studies I've realized what UQ specifically is looking for in a med student, and so I think I have some advice there for people. And yeah, just really practicing regularly, practicing in different ways, different styles of questions, and with lots of different people is my best advice.
Yeah, perfect, cool. And then Luke, obviously, because you both interviewed at UQ, I was thinking, Luke, maybe your track record, you might have gone through an even more complicated, interviewed somewhere else, and then ended up getting a place at UQ.
Surprisingly, once I got an interview, it was that was the most straightforward part. It's a lead up. I definitely agree. I think practice is key, and I think starting early is really important. A lot of people will be like, oh, I don't want to put the effort in until I know for certain I'm going to get an interview. I'm not going to say that if you do that, it's too late, but the interviews offers come out, within a month from the interviews most of the time. You really don't have very much time. So if you're waiting until you get an offer, you're potentially sacrificing, or you're potentially not having, several months worth of prep that you could have had otherwise. And I think the way that I approached the interview was that it was less about the actual interview itself, but more an exercise in me sort of getting to know myself and being able to talk about myself. So I spend a lot of time sitting down and being like, okay, what are my strengths and weaknesses? And this is helpful for the personal questions, but also just in general for, the way that you're kind of approaching the actual interview. Because I think getting to know yourself well, and, having examples of times that you've experienced challenges and how you kind of navigated those, it tells you a lot about yourself. And I think that comes across quite well in interviews, even if it's not actually specifically asked. So taking the time to really sort of sit down and have a think about who you are, what your values are, what's important to you, why you want to do medicine, and the classic why medicine question. I think that's really important. And also just educating yourself around important health issues, even if it doesn't necessarily come up in the interview. I'm not going to say too much information about the actual interview, because obviously there's NDAs and things like that, but a lot of the time there aren't really specific questions about what are your opinions on this particular issue. But having opinions about those issues informs the way you talk about certain situations. And even if it's not specifically relevant to that, being able to identify what your values are and what's important to you, and why those things are important to you, I think is really important. And also, I don't know what the situation is for all of the universities going into this application cycle, and whether or not some universities are going back to in-person interviews. I don't believe any are, but some might. Either way, I was preparing for a Zoom interview, and I practiced recording myself. I think especially when it comes to online, if you're not used to being on camera, you're looking at yourself, you're not really paying attention. And although that's not super important in the grand scheme of things, getting comfortable talking on camera, I think is really important. So every night I would, have a random question, and I would just film myself, and then I'd watch myself. It was absolute agony, but you'd watch yourself and, see how many times you made weird glances or when you weren't looking at certain things, and you slowly you get more comfortable over time, and I definitely think that paid off. So I started doing that early, and even putting in that 5 minutes every night, I think over time really compounded and was really helpful.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And I can relate to that because like starting the YouTube channel, I'm actually not someone who, I don't like being on camera. Like I don't have photos taken of me. I don't exist kind of thing. So it's the strangest thing to, like, people who have like done Casper recently will know this as well, because it's that same kind of experience. Talking to a webcam and having no feedback from a person is so weird. And it does take a little bit of practice to get used to that process, and just like trusting like that someone else is listening on the other end at some point. Yeah. And then Liv, what about for Unimelb? I'm really interested in the Unimelb one because obviously this is my number one preference. So
it's a strange interview. So I'll start with probably more general things. Because it's pre-recorded, I did a lot of recording of myself. I had a friend who was also applying, and we had like a crazy spreadsheet where each day of the week we had a different question type, and we would pick each other a question, record our answers, and then get feedback that way, which I found really helpful. Because although it's pre-recorded, there is still another person. And so when you only have a minute per question, you kind of want to be trying to make a connection with whoever's listening. And so making sure that they can see your hand gestures, you're making eye contact with the camera, like stuff like that. I did actually realize as I watched myself a lot was very helpful. I practiced a lot, but I won't touch on that because everybody else has. Unimelb specifically though, the timing is not great. It's really hard. And so the way I tried to conceptualize the Unimelb interview is that it's kind of like a pressure test. Like the question types are sort of known to be a little bit odd, and it can be a bit like, I don't understand why they're asking these questions. But I think about it like they're trying to see how you cope under pressure. Like they're trying to kind of give these questions that you can't really pre-prepare for in a really neat way. And so they're saying, I think that kind of environment really brings out, like, if you suddenly have weird communication breakdowns or like you completely panic and blank under pressure. So practice to time. The 1 minute time per question plus 15 seconds reading is really unpleasant. And there were questions where I would just not say anything. Renee can probably vouch. Sometimes I'd read it and I'd be like, I have nothing to say here. I don't know. And so I'd write the question down and think about it. And like, it's only through really suffering in the like, I have no idea what to say. This is really embarrassing. And I'm so scared I'm going to blank on the day, that you can like build the confidence to just know that whatever they throw at you, you're going to say something at least. Because like, yeah, it's hard. But overall, after the practice I did and practicing to time constantly on the day, I actually found the interview quite doable. Like it wasn't as bad as I was building it up. Actually, as well, DTech. Figured I might as well touch on DTech because that's the Unimelb specific station. You need to just come up with like a structure. Like it's one of those questions where if you have a structure for how you answer DTech questions, it's going to make it a lot easier. And then secondly, pre-prepare an answer for if they give you a word and you don't know what it means.
Yeah, so just going through as many different words as possible and thinking about
yeah, because like, and also like for me, because I'm non-science, I was really scared that, well, if they give me a science word that I don't really know, that's a problem. But what I realized is they're not trying to test your science knowledge, they're trying to test how you communicate. And so you can kind of talk about how you would explain it if you did know the word.
Yeah, that was going to be something, I don't know whether or not you can be that specific, but when you're doing a DTech station, is it that you're pretending like you're speaking to the person you're explaining it to and actually doing it like a little acting thing? Or is it that you're kind of breaking the fourth wall and explaining how you would do it almost? Yeah,
so it's kind of acting in that a lot of the time, this is the past DTech questions that are posted online, so this isn't breaching my NDA, but they're like, you're talking to a 10-year-old in a clinic who wants to know what a vaccine is. Explain it to the 10-year-old. So like the way you do it is like just as if you're talking to the person, which can be kind of intimidating. It's like it's a stressful station. It was the station I was most worried for. Yeah, but it's also fun once you get it.
Like for me personally, I'm really looking forward to those because like it's my job to bring science to young people. But I learned in my practice, for anyone else who, because I know tutoring is quite a common kind of uni job for people applying, something that I learned very quickly was be careful, because being a science tutor, for example, your job is to explain technical things still with some technical understanding by the end of it. Whereas I learned that very quickly, that the way I answered it was I was still depending on quite a few technical words that needed breaking down, when like maybe you can like kind of comment on this, Liv, but I would say that the better way to do it is to use much more colloquial, accessible words, because you're speaking to someone who doesn't need the technical takeaways. They just need the functional takeaway.
Yeah, it's more of focusing on like you've got the concept across. Like I think vaccine's kind of a good one where like if you try to explain it, you can end up accidentally trying to rely on a lot of stuff. Yeah. The person you're explaining it to doesn't need to understand the nuance of like
T cells,
immune cells. Like that's just not. So you don't need to do that. It's more like whether they can walk away with like a conceptual understanding rather than a scientific understanding.
Yeah,
like I think that's kind of the way. And it depends on the age group as well. Like sometimes, for example, in a DTech, you might be explaining it to a high schooler, and therefore you can kind of assume they know cells, genes. Like you can kind of tailor it to who you're speaking to, which the DTech questions tend to specify. But just I think people over rely on stuff, and that's actually I think the hardest part is realizing like, oh, I want to use this word, but I can't. And then you're trying to explain it in a minute as well. And so it's like, how am I breaking down all this science so quickly? But with practice, it gets easier. And I think the key takeaway that probably we're all going to say is just like practice, get feedback from everyone you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I also think that another really good tip is to prepare for the uni that you think that you're going to get the interview for, which can be hard to predict. But if you start after you get your offer, then obviously you can do that, you know, when you're interviewing, because the UQ interview is extremely different to the UniMelb interview. We've got, I think, 7 minutes to talk. You don't have to take the whole 7 minutes versus the 1 minute. There's no DTech. I think with UQ as well, something after I did an interview and when I actually got my RTI back, because I submitted an RTI, I won't go into the details of it, but that's like a right to information. So I got to see my scores for each of my questions and what they were looking for. And in a UQ question, they are looking for some certain qualities that they think is important in a physician, in a doctor. And so when you get the question, you've got 2 minutes to think about it, thinking about what exactly are they asking me here? What are some qualities of a doctor that I've looked up on UQ's website that they think are important? What are they looking for in this? And UQ does say what they think is important, what are the important qualities in a physician. So if you can go and source those and in your questions think, what are they looking for here and how can I display that? I think that will do you really well.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I think I'll let you guys know as well. The other night, I'm hoping to make a video on it really soon. I'll probably link it to you guys actually through Instagram or wherever we're speaking. I've made a PowerPoint presentation, which is effectively mocking the online system with a timer that can be edited for different unis. So I've built it around the UniMelb one with the 1 minute per question. But I'm going to make a video and try to get it out this weekend as well, actually, just letting people know how they can edit it. But I'll send it to you as well. So if you want to like link it on the Discord or whatever, it effectively plays so that people can choose to start the station and they can edit and add in their own questions so they can practice it. And then there'll be a timer that starts so they can see how long it is, and that can be edited for different unis and their different kind of processes. And it just automatically jumps to the next screen so that way then, because I was practicing with someone who uses the Discord and they did say that one of the downsides is that often you can see all the questions at once, whereas it might need to go sequentially. So hopefully that fixes it. I'll send it through and then
that's awesome.
Let me know if anything needs changing or if it's not quite right, because I'm a bit on the outside with it. But yeah, and then that can be kind of shared around and hopefully that helps to improve people preparing for their interviews too.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right. So I know we're running a little bit overtime at the moment. I hope I'm not eating into people's free time.
No, it's fine.
No, we're all good.
Where it's all cool. Okay, I do appreciate it. So we'll move on. So the last bit was just looking at now your experiences having all finished the first semester of an MD program. The first one I think is just how's it been transitioning into it? So Liv, I might start with you because you've come from the software engineering end of it and then leapt into the deepest form of of health of any kind, which is medicine. How have you found the kind of transition into medical school?
The main thing that was difficult was honestly probably the study style. So like, just to preface, although I was software engineering as like my job, I always have had medicine as kind of like an interest. So like, so I call myself like a half non-science, like, and then I had the neuroscience. I had like some basic familiarity, but not, I'd never studied physiology, biochemistry, never done that. Like, I don't know any of that, right? So like, the terminology and stuff wasn't as like brand new to me, for example, as it would be to someone who did an arts degree. But so the main thing, like the content itself isn't, at least for me, I didn't find the content conceptually too challenging. Obviously the volume is hard, but conceptually it's not the worst. And I did some study over the summer to try and bring myself up to speed. But the hardest thing is like in a maths kind of computer science engineering degree, you just study by just grinding out practice questions, and like you just code all the time. And like it's a very distinct, like, okay, I want to study for my maths exams, I'm just going to go do maths past papers, and then you just kind of figure it out. Yeah. Whereas medicine, there's like, it's not necessarily just rote learning, but like trying to take on and retain like a volume of information versus just trying to understand and apply a concept. It is a bit different. And so it probably honestly took me half of semester one to even figure out how to study medicine. And I'm still trying to figure out how it works for me. And then obviously I moved interstate, and that was, I think that honestly like was probably harder than starting the degree. It's like setting up in a new city, moving away from everyone, that kind of stuff I think makes the transition as well more difficult, because you're kind of away from all your traditional supports, trying to build new relationships in Melbourne, but those take time to cultivate. And so it's a very kind of isolated time as you sort of figure out how to navigate medical school, and like being much more on your own than you were before. But I feel more settled in now, which is good.
That's good. Does it feel, a short question from me, does it feel a little bit, because I'm obviously contemplating the reverse move that you'd made. So I'm looking at potentially going to USyd next year.
Yeah.
And a genuine fear of mine is that, what if I'm treating those 4 years and 5 years, or maybe six years if you include the 2-year internship. I don't know how the 2 years works now, but like I always have that fear of like, would I have this sense of treating it like a temporary state rather than something where I can kind of put the roots down kind of thing? And would that be a challenging process of like making friends, for example, forming relationships with people, having another life in another city kind of almost like put on hold? Obviously you'd be like, there's the potential to be able to travel and to obviously stay in touch, but do you have that sense at all, being away from family and friends, that it feels temporary, or does it kind of just feel like it's restarting but it feels kind of solid?
So it helps that for me, my family's in Newcastle. So I moved to Sydney for my undergraduate degree. So I've kind of, Sydney also is like, I have some family and friends there now, but Sydney wasn't my home necessarily. It's not where I grew up. Yep. But I think the way I've been trying to view it is that like, even though my family's back in New South Wales and I might want to move back, I can't know what life will look like for me 4, 5, 6 years down the line. And so I may end up permanently settled in Melbourne. I can't know that. And so I need to treat it like I need to build a life here, because it could end up being my life long term. And then even if it's not, I don't want to waste 6 years not building deep relationships with people and stuff because I'm scared I'm going to move. And I guess with technology and stuff these days, you can be really close with people even if you live far apart. And I think it's really normal in medicine that because we all move around for our career down the line, that even if you move back to Sydney and you've got all your, like I moved back to Sydney and I've got all my friends there or whatever, and like everybody moves for their career anyway, so we're probably not gonna all be nicely in Melbourne as is. So I think knowing that kind of helps. We're probably all going to end up scattered anyway. But I think it is really hard, and it does take a lot to settle, be like, okay, this is my life now for the next chunk. It's very difficult, and I think some people struggle more with it than others. But it also helps that there's a huge amount of interstate people in the cohort, and so I met up with people in Sydney before I moved, which helped. so that when I came to Melbourne, I already knew people. I'd met people from the cohort, and so it helps you feel less alone during that transition.
Yeah, that's really good. It's a really good perspective to have. The idea, it's like, let's just wait and see, like,
yeah,
being free to kind of leave it open-ended, not feel locked into a particular way to view it. Yeah. And then Luke, how did you find UQ MD1?
Yeah, I'm enjoying UQ so far. I'm similar to Liv in that I moved into state from Melbourne, and definitely relate to what you're saying in regards to, like, by far for me the most difficult thing has been the adjustment. And I mean I've moved around quite a bit as well. I grew up overseas, and I went to school in South Australia, and then I went to Melbourne.
Right.
But my partner is in Melbourne, and so we're long distance for the foreseeable future until she's potentially able to move up. And that's been definitely very difficult for us, not in terms of our relationship, but more in terms of, you know, going from being able to see each other every day to essentially once a month, if that, if we're lucky, and not really being able to do that, and have that support has been really difficult. And it's definitely been hard for me to sometimes, as you're kind of saying, as Liv was saying, you know, not really sort of knowing where you sort of want to go in the future and stuff like that, being so uncertain and not really knowing where you want to go. For me, you know, I kind of approached it with the mindset of potentially return to Victoria, and I see myself sort of going back there. So I kind of have a bit of a different perspective in that, just because my partner's family's down there, and I just think that I love Melbourne. I just would love to go back. I'm not putting, you know, all of my hope on that. And even though I do have that sort of as the long-term likely goal, I'm still trying to make sure that I'm devoting the time to actually ensuring that I'm setting up a life here in Brisbane, and that I'm not just, you know, living here. I'm not just like existing in Brisbane and then knowing, okay, well, it's only for the next 6 years and then I'm going back to Melbourne, back home.
Right.
But it's definitely difficult to kind of, it's just, it is difficult. It's a huge adjustment. And I think that I wasn't necessarily prepared for how difficult it was actually going to be. I think, you know, I've moved before and I was like, oh, you know, it's going to be fine. But starting medicine is it's so different to everything else I've done previously. And I didn't realize how much I would be relying on that support that I wasn't really getting. Just because, you know, here in a new city with, you know, no one you really know, and, you know, it's been really hard. And I've definitely felt I've had to, like, you know, lean on my friends in Queensland, you know, like Renee, like hanging out and, you know, making friendships here has been really important. And I think, you know, I had an idea that I'd be able to go back more than I've really been able to, just because the course is so demanding. I just, you know, if I go back to Melbourne for the weekend, I think, oh, you know, it's going to be fine. I can do a bit of studying, but when I'm there, I don't want to do any studying. I want to spend, you know, the 48 hours that I have with my partner, without doing anything else. So I think that I've had to really adjust my expectations when it comes to balancing my time and being back and sort of being in between those two cities, as you were kind of describing. I think that it's hard to kind of do that in practice, even if it might feel possible. So yeah, it's a bit hard. And I think, just going into it, I definitely wish I thought, I definitely wish I thought more about the actual challenges of moving and considered that more. I'm glad I did it and I don't regret it. And I'm really enjoying the course. Back to sort of the original question, but it's definitely been an adjustment and that's been difficult.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an important one to talk about too, because it's not like, I don't know, I've never actually moved. I've never left Victoria. Lived my whole life in Victoria and Melbourne. I've only ever been to Adelaide once, and it was like for a weekend. That was it. It's like, otherwise, and like I always say, like I travel for work and stuff. But when I say I travel, I just drive around Melbourne suburbs. So I'm not going too far. So the idea of moving interstate is actually genuinely quite a terrifying thought. But I think it's something that, as you said, it's something that takes a lot of adjusting, but you give it time. And I'd imagine if I asked you the same question, both Liv and Luke, in another 6 months, and your answer will probably be different again. Like that idea of just give it, it just takes time. Yeah. And then Renee, what about you? We were saying before we started the recording that it's been an intense MD1.
Yeah, so I don't have the same challenges that Liv and Luke do with moving interstate. I actually did have to move interstate for med, but it was home. So I'd already moved to Melbourne to do my master's and then moved back to Brisbane. That's kind of why UQ was my first preference, because I wanted to move home. I'd already been away for 3.5 years. And the concept of moving and the concept of staying in Melbourne or moving somewhere and being away from home for another 4 years was quite scary to me. And I don't even know if I had an offer from a non-Queensland school that I would have gone. I'm not sure. Luckily that I didn't have to make that decision. So yeah, my transition's been a little bit different and probably easier. I have my partner here. We live together, so that's fine. But I definitely think that the transition to med school is in some ways what you would expect, because everyone understands that med school is quite intense, but it's not until you actually live it that you're like, wow, like this is really intense. So yeah, I think that from speaking to people, UQ has one of the most intense workloads. And I don't think that that's something that people really consider when they're preferencing schools, when they're in the med applicant stage. What's the intensity going to be like right off the bat? And I would say that UQ is probably one of, if not the most intense straight away, with like the preclinical years and the clinical science that you have to learn. But in saying that, I think especially for people coming through post-grad, that intensity is also something that makes you feel so grateful for where you are, because you make big strides in your knowledge very quickly, and you feel much more, competent and capable as you go. So I think a post-grad student who's done the GAMSAT, got a good GPA in an undergrad course, any of them can take on this level of intensity. I think I've seen the most struggle with some of the provisional students, like I said, who had just had to maintain that 5 GPA in a standard undergrad course, whether that was nursing, physio, biomed, computer science. They really can do anything they want. Taking that step from that undergrad to the MD, very different. But I think if you have the drive to do the GAMSAT, get a good GPA, sit an interview, you have what it takes to take on an MD course anywhere in the country. So I don't want to scare anyone off with saying that. It is intense, but anyone who's done that can definitely do it.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable for people to hear, because a lot of the questions that I get, and I'm sure you get them on the Discord and on the subreddit as well, is that people, I think there's so much uncertainty about like, what does the year actually look like? So then that translates into people like, oh God, what if I'm not prepared for this? Or what if I'm not good enough to keep up with it? And so just, yeah, I think for people hearing you say that, like, anyone can do it. It's obviously not just a breeze. It's not easy work or anything. There's going to be work that's put into it. But yeah, I think that's very, very encouraging.
I think that if you get in, you sit the GAMSAT, you maintain your GPA, you do your interview, you've proven to yourself that you can do it. Yeah. Whether life factors disrupt that, and you do end up struggling first year, know that the universities, they don't want you to fail out. Once you're in, they want to keep you. So if you do struggle a little bit to begin with, there are support services at every single university. If you fail out of things, there's supplementary exams. I have people that I know who are repeating first year, but they give you that opportunity. And yes, that's not ideal, but once you are in, the med schools want to keep you. They don't take you on and then challenge you and try to force you back out. They want you there, so you will be able to do it if you have the drive to do it and the support.
Yeah,
they really work with you. If you want to keep staying in, they'll work with you, right? So like, it's challenging, but if you're struggling, you just make use of the support that is available and make sure to keep in contact with the like MD1 coordinators and stuff. And like, they don't want to kick you out, because like they've invested a lot of resources. The government's invested a lot of resources. Like, if you're in, you're safe. They're not trying to get rid of you.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah.
And so I think we might, it's getting quite late, so I might try to wrap it up a little bit. I really don't want to take up too much of your afternoon. This little one behind me is about to start getting very restless too.
Yeah.
Put him on my lap.
I have a sausage as well. Do you want to see my sausage?
I saw one in the background.
Go get the dog, Renee. Go get Bear.
We're going to get them all on camera now. Settle down.
Sleeping, but here he is.
There he is. Oh, yeah.
And there's Minnie.
And I think, Liv, I saw a cat floating around. We've got pets in
a dog. She is a dog. A small dog. Yes, a schnauzer.
Oh, okay, because I saw
but
Grey.
She's very fluffy. She's a very overgrown schnauzer.
Okay.
She's sleeping and has been sick. I will not interrupt
Oh,
her.
no. Okay, don't interrupt her. That's fine.
She will get angry at me.
Anyway, so, I hope that people watching this really took a lot out of this. I hope that you guys have all enjoyed yourself this afternoon as well, just in recording it. It's been great to be able to actually chat through. We've been back and forth a little bit on Instagram. It's quite surreal to have been kind of, technically I'm a bit of a stalker on the Gamsat. I don't really post or anything, but I do watch, and I think that the changes that are being made and the conversations that are being had now, and I'm sure even more so on the Discord, making a really, really positive impact on the application process, people's awareness and preparedness for going into medical school. And I'd like to think as well that it's having a positive impact on the kind of doctors that are coming out the other end at the same time. So thank you so much for all your time this afternoon.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah.
For having us.
Yeah, not a problem.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Well, I'll leave that one there and I'll see you guys in the next one.
Cool.
Yeah.
See ya.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Dissecting Medicine podcast. Please leave me a comment with your thoughts and share this episode with others that might benefit. Otherwise, thanks for listening and I'll see you next time.